Hi, everyone. My name's Christine Catapon, Katipon, but you know, you know how it goes. I'm the current president of our chapter. We are the newest brand spanking chapter of the 30 plus chapters. I also work as a staff psychologist at the UCI Counseling Center, so it's been great to come back and give back to our Anteater family. And I also work in private practice. And I also am the current co-chair for the Division on Filipino Americans for the Asian American Psychological Association as a clinical psychologist. And this is how I know my lovely friend, Dr. Michelle Madore, because we are both on the executive committee for that board. So we're really excited to talk mental health with all of you today. Michelle?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Michelle Mcmoore. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist at VA Palo Alto Healthcare Center, where I direct a national program looking at the use of something called transcranial magnetic stimulation for treatment-resistant depression. As Christine mentioned, I am also a member of the executive board on Filipinx Americans and the Asian American Psychological Association, where I serve as the finance officer. And I'm also the chair of the Ethnic Minority Affairs Subcommittee for the Society for Clinical Neuropsychology. We have a very wide public interest advisory committees, and so I serve in that role as well. So thank you so much for your time, everyone, and we are really looking forward to talking about culture and mental health with everyone today.
And it's funny how we met, because we met in professional circles, and then we found out that we were both anteaters afterwards. We're like, oh my gosh, that's, you know, so I kind of love that piece of, like, when you find an alum, you just like gravitate toward them. Just like with our Filipino heritage, whenever we see a Filipino across the room, we just like zoom in on them. I feel like that's how Anteater alumni are as well. So we just want to talk about culture and mental health today. And I think we wanted to start with a disclaimer. You know, I know our statements about who we are, it's like, oh, it's so professional, but you know, we're not giving professional advice today. We're just kind of giving our thoughts and sharing our experiences about what it's like to address culture and mental health. Anything you want to add, Michelle?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that even though this is not a professional counseling session or therapy session in way, shape, or form, you know, a lot of our understanding and perception of this topic is influenced by our perception, or profession, excuse me. And so that really is an important perspective to have, and that's why we felt it would be really good to take the time to talk about that, is from the professional and personal lenses together.
And this presentation is just meant for, well, we love talking to each other, and then you'll get to experience how we are. And I think it's so great to be able to, you know, co-host this panel discussion with Michelle, because there's a comfort level, and we talk about the hard stuff in our profession. So it's really helpful to be able to talk about such a sensitive topic with someone that you trust, you know. And with everything going on today, you know, I want to acknowledge that I know that this is a heavy time to be talking about culture. And so if anything we share may be triggering or overwhelming, it's okay to pause and, you know, take a step out of the room. You know, it's like you got to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. I don't anticipate that we're going to talk about anything too heavy, but, you know, we never know what could be triggering for somebody. So please do take care of yourselves. Step out, take a drink of water, do some deep breathing, mute us for a bit if you need to. And that's perfectly okay, because we want everyone to feel comfortable and safe as we talk about this, which is so important. So we saw in the description that this presentation is supposed to talk about the ways that culture positively influences mental health. And yeah, we're going to kind of talk about both aspects.
You can't talk about one side without the other first.
Right. The dark and light side of the force, as it were.
Exactly. And the dark side informs growth. So what we know about emotions, all emotions, good emotions, bad emotions, they are informative. And we should listen to either aspect of them, even though we may be tempted to stuff or may have been culturally groomed in our lives to stuff. They are pieces of information, good or bad.
I like that. And even though the Filipino American Alumni Chapter is hosting this, we're not going to be talking specifically about Filipino culture. We're hoping that this creates some information about culture in general. And, we may provide some of our own unique anecdotes about what we've experienced being Filipino psychologists in the field, but we're hoping that this information is going to be applicable for everybody, so that there's awareness, there's empathy, and just like an opening for dialogue and to be able to support other people that we might see in distress. So we'll start with the negative and end with wrap with the positive.
I think that's a great idea. And in general, I think the most general part of the negative is thinking about how sometimes culture in general perpetuates mental health stigma.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I know what I've experienced, but what do you think about culture and stigma, Michelle? Like, how do you see it in your populations?
I serve a lot of different populations, veteran culture, which is very masculine in nature. So there is this disconnect. So when we think of stigma, for people who might not know what we're talking about this idea that having a mental health concern or a mental health illness or acknowledging your feelings is bad. That's stigma. If I do these things, that makes me a bad person. If I say that I need help, if I show weakness or vulnerability, then that makes me a weak person, right? They internalize and take that on as part of their identity and who they are, rather than understanding it's a process that can help us grow.
And it's so individual to each person. And yet when we come from a collectivistic culture, which is one that is not individualized, but, sees it as a whole, which many cultures of color are, it just becomes hard to step away from those messages because you're hearing it from your family, you're hearing it from commercials in, your home country. I mean, there's just so much influence that as a whole, you may receive all these messages that say, if you go to therapy, you're crazy, you're not praying hard enough. I work with our UCI students, and I also work with young adults who identify as LGBT in my private practice. And so these students and these clients are getting all sorts of messages about stigma and being wrong. And, it's like, how do you deal with that? And then open yourself up to talking about mental health when there's a risk that you're just acknowledging that something's wrong with you. And so, we want to acknowledge that stigma is such a crucial, critical part in why people are not seeking help and mental health support.
And I think the other part of it is when culture dictates in a way that we aren't supposed to acknowledge that anything is wrong, lot of mental health symptoms manifest physically, right? So rather than noticing I'm sad or angry, it's I have a stomach ache, I have a headache, I feel a little nauseous, rather than using emotion words. When we let these things build up, they physically impact us.
Totally. That's where you get your high blood pressure from, your ulcers, IBS, if any of these are resonating for all of you, and your doctor tells you that's not what's happening. It's like, many of our students go to the student health center first when they're experiencing something. And then they're like, nothing's wrong with you. But I was having a heart attack. No, this is a panic attack, and you might want to go to the counseling center. So part of the reason we want to talk about this stuff is so that we can give you some information about how to talk about distress, how to talk about mental health with one another, and hopefully decrease the stigma. of what's associated with mental health. So a lot of people have so many ideas of what therapy means. And I don't know if any of you do as well, but we can also bust some of the myths, right, Michelle?
Absolutely.
Like one I've heard is therapy means you're weak or you're crazy. And what I hear, like maybe from 50% of my students, that means you're crazy, means you're weak, because they're parroting everything that they've heard from family, friends, society, etc. What I tell them is it's the bravest thing you could do for yourself, because most people stick their heads in the sand and avoid it, hoping it'll go away. But no, it builds up into more and more things. Like I use this metaphor when I first meet somebody. Imagine that you have a container inside of you, and it's where you hold all of your feelings. And if you don't actually do something with those feelings, it just starts filling up to the point where you reach max capacity. And it doesn't take long until like a small pebble of a trigger or a big boulder, just drops into this container, makes everything overflow, and it comes out like panic attacks, headaches, stress, IBS. I don't know why I keep bringing up IBS. I don't have it, but it's out there. So, but it manifests in physical and emotional symptoms. These are people who are going to hold it until they explode because they just never learned how to address it. But this is why it takes so much bravery and courage to come to therapy, because it takes courage to face our fears and to move through them so it doesn't hurt anymore.
I really like the one that I use is similar, but it's a little bit different. So as I mentioned, I work with veterans, and I do a lot of cognitive testing, so assessing people's thinking skills, because people don't often realize that when we have symptoms of anxiety or we have symptoms of depression, or if we've experienced a trauma, it actually impacts your brain. It totally dysregulates your neurotransmitters, and it makes you think slower. It makes you be less attentive to your environment, which then impacts other cognitive abilities. And so when I recommend therapy for a particular person, within the setting that I work at, I like to use the soda bottle example. So you have a soda bottle and you're carrying it around with you. So you're carrying around your emotions in this soda bottle, and something happens that makes you upset, but you don't deal with it. You avoid it. Soda bottle drops. Pressure builds up because it's carbonated. And you ignore it. You're like, it'll be fine. I'm not going to open it yet. But then something else happens. And something else happens. And you keep dropping it and dropping it. But you ignore it. You're like, oh, whatever. I'll just deal with it later. Until so many things have built up all of this pressure inside, it explodes. And you're no longer able to control it anymore. And suddenly you're wearing it. Right? You're wearing this soda. And it comes out as anger. It could be, you could take it out on your loved ones because you decided to yell at them, but that's really not what's happening. It's really something else that's going on. And that makes you feel even worse. So going to therapy can really help acknowledge that, so that you can release some of the pressure rather than have it explode and you're wearing your emotions all over the place.
I love your metaphor, especially since I think it's so relatable. I mean, how many of us have like shaken a soda bottle only to have it explode? And, but I don't want to wear all those stored up emotions. That would be horrible. It's like, it's just, I think of it as, so people come to therapy, right? And we have this container full of emotions. Therapy does two things. When we talk about our feelings and talk about what's going on, we don't know what's in this sludge. By this time, everything has been dumped into this container, and I call it black sludge or brown sludge because it's just like green stuff and red stuff and blue stuff and gross stuff. Well, therapy works twofold. We scoop some of it out when we talk about it, and we acknowledge and we name it, like, this is real, this is happening, this is valid, instead of a lot of the self-talk that we might engage in. Like, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with me, or I'm wrong, it's my fault, all of these things that don't make any sense because there's not really a whole lot of proof other than the fact that you thought it. So we take a scoop out little bit at a time, and we spread it on the table. We see how, I'm objective because I'm not in your life. And we're not going to chismes. That's Filipino for gossip. We love our licenses too much. We're not going to do any of that stuff. But, we'll put the little scoop out and we'll spread it out and see what we're actually dealing with. And then we help the person find the solutions to their problems by making connections and raising self-awareness, by talking about it and naming it and making it valid. Because many times we don't say anything and it just like stays up here. And then secondly, it's not enough to just vent out, because then it could just like fill back up again. So we want to teach you coping strategies, different ways of thinking about things, different ways of approaching and responding to things. A lot of the things we talk about are relational, and so by talking about it and learning communication tools, learning how to reframe I suck into I'm doing the best that I can at any given moment, things like that. And what that does is it helps change the way we feel about ourselves. We can't control our feelings, so that's usually a pretty good guide of like, hey, something's not working here or something's working, keep that up. That's all positive feelings are. Like, this works, keep doing it. Negative feelings are not bad in and of themselves, but it's like it just tells you something's not working. And I think with a lot of cultures, if you come from a Judeo-Christian background like Filipinos do, we're so prone to going right into the bad and evil and good and holy. And so that's a big part of, if we're talking about culture, we're not saying any of these things are wrong, but sometimes people come in with values that they're not sure about, like maybe somebody's interpretation of something isn't working for them, like who they are. So it's that kind of stuff that we talk about in therapy, so that it keeps the emotional level at a decent level, so it's not overwhelmed all the time. And by using tools like mindfulness, like cognitive behavioral interventions, like thought logs, sorry, I'm CBT, so that's all I know. We can help you find out what works for you so that you can keep having the happy feelings of things that work for you. I'm talking too much.
No.
Over to you, Michelle.
But I think it's also important to understand that one therapist does not fit all. You may try a person and it may not work. There may be something that doesn't jive. Maybe they don't have the same understanding of your values or worldview. And this is where culture can kind of clash. There are lots of different therapists that are informed by their culture, where they may use religion to help guide a person to solve their problems. But other people might want to have someone that they feel like they can identify with, who will understand their struggle. And it may not be the exact same struggle, but something similar enough so that they can help guide you through it. A lot of people think, oh, if I go to therapy, I'm going to be in therapy forever. If I go to therapy, the therapist is going to tell me what to do and they're going to start controlling me. That's not what it's about. It's about getting an objective perspective on something that's going on in your life. And if you are with a therapist that's telling you what to do, it's time to find a new therapist.
Yeah. That's not what we do.
No, not at all. That is a board complaint waiting to happen.
It's a big myth. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like we give you options and you try these out and you use your own wisdom. So, when I talk to people about therapy, I'm like, okay, I have training, I have experience and whatever, but you have your own inner wisdom that's informed by your culture, your relationships, your experiences, your upbringing. And so you are the expert on you, not me. And so this is more like, here's some ideas or options you could consider. Why don't you try them out and figure out what works for you? And then by doing that, you create your own set of tools that is specific and unique to you. So if somebody tries it and like, oh, that was terrible. I'm like, okay, I got plenty more up my sleeve. But this really is about your process and your wisdom. So thank you for bringing that up, Michelle. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's important. I think just to kind of summarize some of the things that we've discussed already. So we know that therapy is meant to help us identify feelings that sometimes culture minimizes. It is meant to be utilized as a tool to explore coping strategies in a safe space, right, so that we can, in a way, workshop with that person. Hey, I tried this and it sort of worked. How can I do something different, right? And that is what the therapist really is there for, is it's not a venting session, as you mentioned, Christine, where you word vomit your problems and then you leave and you think, oh, better now, right? Because you haven't found any solutions. You haven't tried anything different. But this is someone who says, you know, this is what I hear you saying to me. Or, you know, all of the things that we've talked about, there seems to be a theme, which is whatever the case may be, whether it's poor self-esteem, I'm not worth being loved, you know, no one understands me. So we've noticed this theme. So how do we address that? It can be through coping skills. It can be through changing our patterns of thinking. It can be through learning to interact with people in a different way. But, you know, I don't know about you, but sometimes I think about what barriers prevent people from going to therapy. Why else besides the fact that they're mystified about therapy that might prevent them from going?
Yeah, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking about, you know, how culture is sometimes a barrier, but I think in this case for help-seeking behaviors and barriers, it's like, but sometimes culture is a really good thing if you can find somebody who can appreciate that, because I cannot tell you how many times I've experienced clients and myself when I'm going to therapy, because I practice what I preach, you know, that they don't feel, you know, they don't necessarily have to have a shared identity with the client, but if you get this sense that they really can't understand your worldview or not even open to understanding why. I mean, I've had plenty of my own therapists minimize my, you know, my need to be respectful of my elders. Like, I'm sorry, that's a non-negotiable value for me. So we got to work around that. Most recently, like in the last 3 months since I moved to Irvine to start this job, I was looking for a therapist. And she was a Caucasian woman, which is fine because I've had plenty of Caucasian female therapists and I don't have a problem with it. But this, like, the third thing she said out of her mouth was, well, I don't see color. And I should have just left at that because I was so bristled and I felt so unsafe. And I was like, I don't agree with that. I don't like that, but being me with all of my cultural influences and identities, I'm like, fine, I'll give her a chance. Maybe she'll redeem herself. But she doesn't. So I'm like, I don't want that experience for people. So one of the help seeking or the barriers is like, you can shop around. Like Michelle was saying, like, not every therapist is a good fit. I'm sure she's a lovely person. She has a private practice in Irvine. She must be successful. But not everybody's going to be a good fit. So it is up to people as a consumer to like look around. And if they feel more comfortable with a Filipino, then so be it. If they feel more comfortable with an African-American therapist, so be it. I think what I love about the ECI Counseling Center is so diverse. And we work with a diverse clientele, but it's nice that there's so many of us represented in the center that students have a good chance of getting connected to someone who has a shared identity, whether that's culture, sexual orientation, religion, what have you. And I really love that about our center. But yeah, people would be turned off if they, you know, maybe culture is a good thing when it's like, oh, I'm going to this Filipino therapist who I don't have to explain anything to. And that's why I have a lot of Filipino clients.
But if you can't find someone who matches your culture, your identity, the next preferred thing would be finding an ally for your culture, a person who understands the struggles that people of color may go through, or that women go through, or that people of different genders, whether it be binary, non-binary, if someone identifies as trans, who understands those things without being like, oh, I don't see color. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. That doesn't have anything to do with you.
Oh,
Really?
yeah.
You've got to be kidding,
Yeah.
right? Because
Like people that don't even ask. I'm like, oh my gosh, how can you do that?
how can you not ask? That is the super, super important thing to take into consideration, because it's all part of your identity, of who you are, of who I am.
Mhm.
And with that comes with layers of privilege or lack of privilege that influences how we interact with people. It influences our experiences, be them good or bad.
Right.
One thing that came to mind, as you mentioned, therapists in Irvine, is I remember how affluent that area is. And therapy can be expensive. And
Oh, yeah.
a lot of people think,
Oh,
if I don't have health insurance, or if the counseling center happens to be really backed up, I can't get therapy.
mm-hmm.
And
Accessibility.
yeah, right. Money is a big issue, and especially now during this, global pandemic, people are losing their jobs, which is
Right.
creating additional stress and emotional burden in addition to financial burden. It does not ever hurt to ask if someone takes sliding scale.
Yeah.
If they're willing to see you at a lower discounted negotiated price, because many therapists do.
I do. At least during this time, for sure. I mean, one of my clients lost her job, and I was like, we'll figure something out. And so we did. Yeah. And when you were talking about accessibility, I was thinking about this whole myth that, if you go to therapy and you use your insurance, then your future employers or, other people are going to know your mental health history. And it's a very, 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 very small percentage of jobs that would actually look at that. And those include military,
Yep.
police. Is that it?
You're like an FBI agent.
Oh yeah, like something like high level. But if you're, working in a hospital or you're a teacher or anything like that, that's not going to show up on your records. There's a thing called confidentiality, where we don't share any of your information with anyone unless there's a risk of harm to self or others, or abuse or neglect for, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Populations like children, dependent adults, and elderly.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. So don't worry about that. And if anything, a lot of companies provide EAP services. So your employers want you to get your stuff together too, because it'll affect your work for sure. I loved what you were talking about, the cognitive aspect. What I'm telling my students is, of course, they're like not remembering any homework or whatever, because I think of it like, this is where the emotional part of your brain is residing, and this is where all the logical thinking kind of stuff. Yes, I will explain what EAP is real quick. But if you have a traffic jam up here and your brain stuff is going through this direction, nothing is getting up to the front, and so people are forgetful. I mean, it doesn't have to be long term, but they'll be forgetful. They won't be able to concentrate, etc. And that can happen at work. So EAP is employee assisted programs, and that could be anything from like law support, access to lawyers, but also therapists. And they'll usually provide like 5 sessions of free therapy as part of their EAP services. So employers recognize the importance of mental health. So if you have that available, take advantage of that as well.
It's a great point. Yeah. I was a part of, I serve in the employee assistance pool of therapists at my hospital. And, it is time limited, but they work really hard to identify, what is the root of this? Are these brief sessions going to be enough for this one targeted problem, or is this something that you may need additional sessions for? And for every person that I see, if we come together and decide, oh yeah, they may benefit from additional therapy. It's not me saying, I think you need to do this, right? It's us having a dialogue about, well, how are you feeling and what's going on with you right now? Do you think this would be helpful for you to continue with someone else? Then I provide them with a list of resources in the area. If I know people who are paneled on their insurance, like I go out of my way to help them find someone in the community. And that is part of like the ethical obligation of being a psychologist. You can't just be like, hey, good luck, right?
We don't abandon.
Yeah, we don't abandon you. We help you find someone new. And you may meet someone for therapy and talk to them about what's going on. Then they may go, you know what? I'm not the right person to help you. And this is why. Let's find someone to help you. Right? And that's all part of being a psychologist. Understanding our limits of who we can and can't work with, because we may or may not have the appropriate experience or training with a particular problem.
Right. I'm not going to be a clinical neuropsychologist working with brains.
I love brains.
I think you should make that into a shirt.
You know, right?
and the brain could be the heart. Heart-shaped brains. I don't know. Anyways, I digress. Okay. One of the other things that I was also thinking about, like, why don't people go to therapy? It's so awesome. And I can speak from firsthand experience as the giver and the recipient. So one of the things I think is really hard for people is trying to ask for help when they are the ones who are usually the ones who give help. And I see this in a lot of healthcare providers. I will use the example of nurses in our culture, but it's in every culture. It's like people who provide support and caregiving are usually the worst people at asking for help, because their identity is wrapped up in giving and giving and giving. And so to receive help is so weird to them when they could be doing more. And it does feel good to help other people, but it's like, I use a lot of metaphors with my students, so forgive me, but it's kind of like you have a big Harry Potter cauldron full of the best soup in the world. So I'm going to say chicken tinola, which is this amazing Filipino soup with ginger, garlic, onion, chicken, and fish sauce. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Please try it if you ever get a chance. But so like my metaphor is like, okay, I have a big cauldron of the best tinola in the world, but everyone in my life has a ladle. They can keep it, you know, they can help themselves to all of my tinola. The tinola being my essence, my life essence, my energy, my joy. And people just helping themselves, and you're not asking for anything back, or you're not replenishing it by taking care of yourselves. People be running on fumes. People get burned out. I mean, like, we have to take care of ourselves before we take care of others, like that whole oxygen mask thing.
I mean, the part of the message, though, is understanding that people of different cultures, people of Filipino culture, are groomed and socialized to not accept help.
Yeah.
Right? We are given so many messages at different stages in our life about why we can't accept help from others because it makes us weak, how we can't talk to somebody about our emotions because that's just silly and makes us weak. Like,
or suck it up.
Yes,
just suck it up. Just, you know, it'll go away. Just suck it up.
Give it a little time. You'll be fine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's not how it works.
No. Busyness, boulder.
Everything explodes, and then you're wearing
Everything explodes.
Everything.
Right. So who wants to explode? Who doesn't want to just kind of gently and with support and no judgment, like, talk to someone to get really objective feedback? Oh, here's another thing. Medication. Okay, so let's talk about medication. So it's interesting because I have a lot of students whose parents will just take the medication but not the therapy. And I'm a proponent of medication, but not if there's more going on that contributed to why there's a mental health concern in the first place. You know, if you're popping this medication as just like, I'm just going to get rid of the symptoms, but I'm still going to stay in this state of stress. I'm not going to set boundaries. I'm not going to do anything. It's not making it go away. It's just a Band-Aid. What it does is helps turn down the volume for symptoms, but it's not going to make your problems go away, right? it's like it creates a space where, you know, if therapy can be too overwhelming to talk about emotions, maybe, you know, medication can help turn down the volume so there's, you know, a capacity to be able to process that stuff, or to just create space while they're going through whatever stressor they're going through. So for many people, medication doesn't have to be a long-term thing.
Yep. And the best evidence is for, if possible, doing both. Taking medication and doing therapy.
Yes.
Because they are, just as you mentioned, targeting different things.
Yeah. But somehow medication is more accepted than therapy, because nobody needs to know what pill you're popping or whatever. It's like anything that doesn't show that you are dealing with mental health problems seems to be the preferred method.
Because you have to save face.
Yeah.
Right? It's important.
Oh, save face. Yeah, big time.
Face. Right? You
Especially in collectivistic cultures.
Like, I have to appear perfect. I have to appear that I have everything together. And if I do this, then I don't look that way, and I'm going to shame my family.
Oh gosh, can we talk about family shame, please? Please continue.
No, but like, or I'm going to, or the shame on myself is going to also shame my family, and then they're going to be shunned. Their friends are going to want to talk to them. The extended family is going to be like, oh, look, you did something bad, and now your child is a failure.
Yeah. And it reflects on the parents. So they're going to want to say everything to, and you know, these are broad generalizations. I'm not saying that every, you know, culture does this, but this is what I hear a lot of, you know, from our Anteater family, from the people that we work with. It's so prevalent in people of color about the shame and the guilt, and how that reflects on their family, how it reflects on them. And so they have so many other layers to consider in seeking therapy. And I want to acknowledge it again, because they're dealing with all that, and yet they're brave enough to come in and face their concerns. So it is hard work. It is hard. It's not easy. It starts out really challenging. But if you can hang in there for the initial part, then you know, it's like most people feel better, but at the very least, they've gained information about themselves. They feel better than when they came in, you know, before. Or if the therapy wasn't working, hopefully they gain enough insight about themselves to say, hey, this isn't working for me. Bad feelings. And I don't want to continue with this. So those are just things to consider. But yeah, there's acculturation, there's sexual identity, there's gender identity. There's just so much to consider. And when I think about that in combination with all these other aspects of identity, it's like we have to take into consideration the intersectional piece, because the combination of everything creates a different way of approaching and supporting each person. So you're not going to get a cookie cutter type of treatment. Hopefully you'll work with somebody, if you decide to seek out therapy, it's going to take all of your identities, all of your culture into consideration. Be humble about it, be inquisitive. You shouldn't have to teach them about your culture, but hopefully they'll, you know, show that they are wanting to learn more about you. Not that you have to teach them, but just know you as a person and how all of these identities fit into what's coming up for you.
And when you are in that space, and you are ready to be in therapy, you really are going in for the long game, right? So Christine had mentioned that sometimes you might start to feel worse in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And that's a very real phenomenon. So a lot of my therapy experience has been treating individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder of lots of different types of traumas that I will not discuss so I don't trigger anyone. And when you're in it, when you are with your therapist and you are making the honest effort to practice the skills that are being proposed, you will experience a slight increase in symptoms in the beginning, because now you are shining a light on something that before you had hid under the rug. But if you stick it out and you stick to it, you really, really can get better.
Yeah. It's like with that container thing. I tell people, I warn people, it could feel hard at first because we're scooping some of that stuff out and you're like, hey, Christine, I left that in there for a reason. I don't want to take that out. It stays there. Well, but that's what brought you here. So let's take a look at it together. And it might not feel comfortable, but if you could stop feeling this way, if we move through this, how amazing would your life be? And then there's a light up, and then there's a buy-in. I don't promise anything. I don't guarantee anything because each person's process is up to them. But it's so rewarding to see them love themselves, to see them, talk more positively about themselves when, it's a really rewarding career. And so I feel really blessed to get to do it. So speaking of that, let's move into the positive things. Let's go there. I feel like we've been pooping on things. I'm like, no, that's not the intent, but just to bring more awareness to some of the troubles of life. Culture does impact mental health. Yeah.
So for us, it's probably the easiest to talk about this very specific aspect of our own culture that kind of demonstrates, or to use that as an example. So just the idea of kapwa, or family, or collective togetherness. Mm-hmm. And when you have found or identified your kapwa, like the people that you can reach out to and you trust that help you grow. And it could be your immediate family. You could open the door and talk to them about it, and they could still be very, very accepting of what's been going on with you. But that aspect of it is exceedingly helpful. Mm-hmm. One of the phenomenon that I have noticed, at least in myself in the last, I would say the latter part of graduate school is when it started for me, and I've noticed this in other individuals too, but when you are looking for you're exploring your cultural identity, how it can really open you up to additional experiences and be in a place that is accepting. And that is really, really amazing when you can find people who are like that. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. I think about when I was first going through graduate school, I didn't know any Filipinos. I felt like I was the only one. And, how many years later, I'm now like the chair of a division because somebody had the thought, like, we need to be represented, we need to be heard. And just feeling validated for how I saw things, because maybe I had a very limited expression or view of what being a Filipino American woman, a daughter of immigrants, was supposed to be like. But then it actually started at Caba. I don't know if any of you were in Caba. I was in Caba and Puso when I was at UCI. And then I had a different experience of Filipinos. I'm like, oh, they're not judgy. Oh, they're not chismosas. Then that's validating for us. But then we also get other families like, what do you mean your family doesn't do this? It's like, oh, there's a different experience. And this is bothering me. So maybe it's okay to seek out support and understanding for what happened to me as a kid. So I love that you brought that up, Michelle. Yeah.
So we're close to the bottom of the hour, and we just want to let everyone know that now is a good time to put any questions that you may have in the chat, in the question and answer box, and we will go through as many of those as we can. If there aren't any questions, then we are more than happy to continue to share.
We have questions, so that's good. There's like 8 in the chat and 1 in the Q&A, so I think I'd like to open the Q&A one.
Okay.
First, if that's okay. I'm a middle school special ed teacher who works in a predominantly Vietnamese community. Multiple students have reached out to me about how overwhelmed, anxious, and depressed they are feeling at home, and that they are really struggling with distance learning. Absolutely. Some asked me to explain to their parents how they are feeling because they're afraid to tell their parents, or their parents just don't understand. How can I help my parents and families really understand how connected academics and social emotional well-being is, acknowledge their child's emotional needs at home, and maybe open up those lines of communication? That's a great question. I see this a lot in my college students that I see. They are all 100% struggling with distance learning at UCI. And one of my things that I do is I kind of use their parents' values against them, if you will, because if I focus on how much people struggle academically, if their stress and their anxiety and their depression aren't addressed, they're not going to do well in school. So if you want them to do well in school, we have to take care of this. And it's just science. I just deflect to science. And with schools, I mean, I'm not sure about your particular setup at the school, but many schools now have school psychologists or school counselors, and sometimes it's hard being the direct person. But if you could have these people of authority or people of, you know, because I know that's very important for a lot of people. It's like, oh, their knowledge, they're an elder, they're professional. If it's coming from a professional, it can be sometimes easier to have the parents buy in. What do you think, Michelle?
And so one of the things that I think is very, very important to take into consideration is that oftentimes communities of color will accept the medical model of explanation. Yes. And so reinforcing that feelings are actually a manifestation of like dysregulated neurotransmitters, which sounds like a lot, but that is the very medical explanation of it. And so if there is this imbalance in our ability to regulate our emotions, which is mediated by our neural circuitry, it there impacts our cognitive functioning in a negative way.
Yeah.
And so talking to families about allowing the space, like it doesn't have to be the parent sometimes, because sometimes the parents don't have the words, and for middle school kids it's really challenging for them to even put labels on their emotions to begin with. Some schools have a school psychologist that they can have a few therapy sessions with, and so, you know, checking to see the availability. If that is not a resource, please feel free to, I think you can get my email from Elsa, and I can help like find some community resources in whatever area that you're in that has materials in Vietnamese too, to be given to the parents, because sometimes getting this explanation in their primary language, if that happens to be their primary language, it might not be, but if that is something that would be helpful, we can definitely get something like that to you as well. So trying to open the dialogue and focusing a little bit on the medical model of the explanation can be very, very helpful.
Yeah, great point. So I want to get to some of these comments. I'm seeing comments on the chat about how people are openly talking about therapy. And I think that is the best thing we can do, is like talk from our experiences, share, dismiss any myths based on your experience. So thank you for those that are sharing comments like, we're talking about it openly, and it kind of gives us permission to make it okay. Like the silence is what creates more of the stigma. But, you know, I think that's why in 10 years of working in college counseling, it's grown exponentially, and I'm glad we're busy, but I really do think it's because celebrities are stepping up. People are just willing to talk about it more and normalize it. So thank you to those of you who are sharing, like, we're talking about it, and that's great. That's where the stigma, you know, begins to recede. So we had another question. Where is it? How do you recommend a child who's been oppressed by a mixture of culture and traditional parenting is now an adult begin conversations with their parents as to how it has affected the child personally growing up suffering with mental health, establish clarity from both sides, and how to develop growth on both sides with this conversation. Ooh.
That one has multiple layers.
Yes.
I think part of it is because there are two things I would say you need to ask yourself. One is, what are you hoping to get out of this dialogue?
Right.
And two, if the dialogue does not go the way that you want it to go, do you have a support system in place as a backup to discuss how that dialogue went? I definitely don't think it's a bad idea to talk about that. But to speaking like personally, I know that would be a very difficult dialogue in my immediate family, like with my parents. And while I would love to be able to talk to them about it, I don't know if they would understand. And the hurt enough from that, for me personally, is enough to seek support about that elsewhere and to change my parenting approach so that it doesn't perpetuate. But that's just me. I'm one person. My brother took an opposite approach, and he actually did share, and there was no dialogue. And that can happen too. But other people, their family becomes very, very open to it. So I think if you were to engage in this dialogue, doing it from a very open perspective, non-blaming, non-judging, just observations, and I felt statements, and like, you did this to me kinds of things will help move that kind of conversation along. Christine?
Right. No, I agree with you with the I language versus you language. It's like, share from your perspective and share your feelings, because the other person may not know what you're experiencing. And so to avoid any defensiveness, when we speak from I instead of you, there's just more openness to it. And I'm coming from a very similar place to Michelle. Now, by the way, never say I know exactly how you feel. That's not going to go well. But I've tried to have the conversations and it did not go well. And I think what I've learned as a therapist is there are only so many things that are within your control. So you can ask yourself, like Michelle said, what am I hoping to get out of this? But ask yourself, is this actually in my control? Because, other people are not in your control, only you are. And so if you've been given feedback, from that person, like that they're not open to it, then you know what to do moving forward. And for me, I got enough feedback that said, I'm not able to have a dialogue with this family member. And I just came into an acceptance with that. But it took some time. So really to know what you need to heal within yourself, and a therapist can help you identify that, as well as how to gather information about your next steps. So I think we're going to wrap up the questions for now, and we'll bring it back to Elsa.
Oh, Elsa, you're muted.
Elsa, you're muted. Can I unmute you? There you go.
There we go.
I'm a co-host.
Yay. Well, I have to say that was really actually very engaging. I love the dialogue between the two of you. The analogies are fun. I'm feeling like I need to get some soda pop. And also just the way you play off each other. Very informative, but very gentle in your approach. So I appreciate your personal stories as well. Thank you. I think most people will agree. This was just an amazing session. And if you're so inclined, you can put your email in the chat so people can catch that and they can follow up with you. I also want to invite all our attendees to ampnet.uci.edu. It is a free platform that is a mentorship platform so that you can find other alumni that are in this field that you may want to get some information from on, is this the type of field that I'd be interested in? And it's alumni to alumni and student to alumni. And it is all free. And what's wonderful about it is it's easy to join, and it will migrate your LinkedIn profile if you have one. So I just want to end this with a great, great sense of gratitude to both Michelle and Christine. They're just amazing together. And we look forward to seeing all of you at our next Anteater Wellness Wednesday. It'll be 7 p.m. next Wednesday. Please go to the alumni website and register for the event. Again, they're free every Wednesday this month. And if you have any specific topic that you're interested in sharing with us, please reach out to myself at UCI. But again, I'm just going to sign off in respect of our time limit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a good
Good
night.
night, all.